Hello. All right. I'm going to kind of wait a little bit while people join the channel. I know that most everybody will be watching via Operation Code Slack team, so I'll be communicating only with them. If you have an interest in joining the Slack team to communicate with me and you found this link somehow like on Twitter or Facebook, all right. Please, sorry, I just realized my audio is on, so I turned it off. There's a huge delay as well. I'd say 30 seconds, unfortunately. So ask me a question right away so I can stop as soon as possible if you are on that Slack team. I realize you're still on the landing page. We're going to get going here. Just want to wait for a few others to join because I do know some people are going to be getting in here. But yeah, Vue.js is a popular framework gaining more traction for front-end web development. A lot of people are stemming off of React because of the licensing issue, which is a whole separate thing and doesn't really affect individuals. But aside from why people would leave React for tertiary reasons, Vue.js is a really solid framework. I highly recommend using it. It works in production very well. It's gaining a lot of traction. I think it's the it's tough to name this metric, but it is accelerating in popularity very quickly. Uh, so yeah, we've got 4 viewers, trying to get some more. I'm gonna wait for a few more minutes, yeah. Go ahead and take a break. I'm gonna turn the AC on and mute my mic for just 2 more minutes and then we'll get going. All right. Time to get going. Again, if you want to communicate with me on Slack, go ahead and make sure you @ me so I see notification. If you're not on Slack, I'm sorry. So here's the app as it is, as it stands. There's a few things that I want to get set up that I'm kind of copy-pasting from another project, and I can explain as I go. Today I want to go over recursive nested components in Vue.js. I kind of will be touching on a little bit of everything within the application. I already have a little tiny bit set up, but a lot of it I still kind of want to go through, so this may be a long cast. Bear with me throughout, or you can just watch the finished project at the end. If I had time to plan things, maybe it would be all scripted and finally edited and stuff, but for now it's live streamed. So, let's go ahead and I'll show you the terminal actions that I was working with. I'm just going to make sure that I got my keyboard shortcut set up properly. Yes, you do see that. Okay, so if we scroll up here, I can kind of show you what I did. To begin this project, I did a Vue init webpack test. People used to React are used to using create React app to start easy projects and go from there because they have the webpack configuration set up pretty nicely. The nice thing about Vue is it is a framework, not a library, so they come out of the box with a lot of things already included. And you'll kind of see the big differences as we go forward. But essentially, there is 4 major template types. I forget what they are, but typically most people just kind of dive into the Webpack one if you don't want to deal with learning about the API and use everything to the fullest power. As you can see, it offers some options, Vue Router, just like React Router. ESLint, I didn't add lint because I don't want to get yelled at by a linter, but typically I'll have this on. I'll almost always have unit tests, but I won't use Karma and Mocha. And you can add all these options as you go. The folder gets generated. You go inside and you run npm or yarn install. And I added a few libraries that I know I'm going to need as we go forward. I added Vuex, which is essentially Vue, the official Vue Redux. It's the state management library. I personally like Vuex a lot more than either MobX or Redux. I think Vue.js gets the state library like syntax correct. But I've written a whole blog article on the major differences between Vue and Redux, and I feel like they could force to one-way data binding instead of have some washy things that we'll kind of see as we go forward. Axios, I have an API that I've created. Bootstrap and Vue Bootstrap, or Bootstrap Vue rather. I don't want to deal with any stylings right now, so I'm just going to bring in some components that I'm familiar with. And like I said, I will be kind of copy-pasting from like another project, and I'm going to do my best to explain. I'm going to make sure you can see my code. You can. Cool. So here's what we kind of end up with. Obviously, config is the webpack, or build is the webpack rather, and config kind of creates environments based off your development server, node modules, and here's the source folder we're provided. You could see earlier my browser. This is kind of what is being rendered right now. If I saved some of the files that I'm writing, the files that I'm writing are all within Vuex. So we're not going to see any kind of failures or problems right now because I'm not trying to change what's rendered on the screen. So I'm not going to show you the browser for a little while. I just want to handle state management first so that I know that we have a skeleton set up for getting the data from the endpoint. Which, by the way, I keep talking about the endpoint. This is kind of the data we're going to go through. Recursive components are definitely not always required, but essentially what I've figured is if you have recursive components are great on a single level. I haven't had a use case for them because you could typically just use v4 in Vue.js, or if you're in React, you would just kind of create an iterator for the rendered items. For My use case for a recursive nested component, it's just that. Like I found the use case for recursive components when a similar component with different data was nested within another one above it. And so as you can see here, our endpoint is kind of like, we've got, I'm kind of going to decrease a few of them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cities. Inside cities, they have, you know, a random number of locations. But the entire data is just a massive list of states, and each state object contains a list of city objects, and each city object contains a list of address or location objects. And I'm kind of going to show you how we can create this kind of nested drop-down where you click on a state and it shows you all the cities available for that state, and then you click on a city and it shows you all the locations available for that city. Right now on my browser, you can't see it. I'm opening the Bootstrap Vue website so I can make sure I can reference that API. And I'm also going to have Vue.js.org open up for their documentation. And lastly, Vuex documentation. My stream may downgrade while I visit all these websites. Cool. Got all the links open. Alright. So now we can finally get into this. Here's the only component that's being rendered. I can kind of dive into the structure a little bit. Out of the box, store was not a directory available. What was available was assets inside of source, components, app.vue, main.js, and then this static folder. And as you can see, git keep for version control. Static isn't really in use unless you build. And build is for production, where it minifies and uglifies all the JS and CSS and HTML. It doesn't uglify CSS. I missaid that. It uglifies JS. Anyways, that's pretty much what we've got from the get-go. Here's main.js. I know that I'm going to need to make a few changes in here to make sure that Bootstrap works correctly. So let's go ahead and do that while we're in here. What I'm doing right now is just importing the proper files to make sure that Vue Bootstrap works correctly. And eventually we're going to integrate the store, so I can do this right here. I want to see what the sync function does. Yeah, no, we're good. Sync is only if I have a router with a store. A lot of this won't be too important to you. I just want to know, I want you to see where you kind of bring in like production level imports. I think separation of concerns is done pretty well within Vue, so that's kind of what we're doing there. Okay. So here is the main kind of API in action. If you've never used Vue.js before, or you're interested in kind of furthering your knowledge, I personally really enjoyed Udemy, Maximilian Schwarzmüller's Udemy video on it. He starts out in the API, which is a non-traditional approach, I feel like, where you just dive right into the internals of using it the ugly way. I feel like I learned Vue.js correctly by diving into the API first and learning things the ugly way and seeing how it all works. But essentially, the Vue framework is just an object, which makes sense. It's just kind of this whole class-based section. L stands for element. It's kind of like the selector. So basically, our Vue app starts at L, and eventually we'll be doing Vue.component to create components. If we were doing the ugly API way. But with this framework, we've got this set up with this new syntax where you can kind of pass in components as they go forward. So as you can tell, we've got an app.vue file. We've imported app from .app.view, and there it is. The one other thing that I know that I'm going to want to bring in is I'm going to want to bring in the store. I don't need to do that. Boom. The store is now imported. So that's main.js. I'm going to close that. We've done enough there. I'm going to show you app.view. So this is kind of our container. A good architecture is to have a containers folder and to put files in there with all their state management, and to only pass items to, only pass props, or pass states as props to components, to keep, separation of concerns pretty clear, where components are purely visual and data is going to be the same every time, whereas your containers deal with your state management. So this is kind of the crux of it. As you can see, and you will continue to see, every Vue.view file has this three-system setup where you've got a template, and that's kind of where you render your React stuff. So within template, just like in React, within template, you can only pass one item. So you have to have a pure parent item, which we do in this case, div ID app. Then it goes into the script section, which this will look kind of familiar to React, where you do all the imports and then you export the default object. And then what I really like about Vue.js as a closet web designer is that styles just freaking make sense in Vue.js. One example is, imagine if you want to use Sass. I actually have to look it up. I think there is an argument that you can pass pretty quickly. I'm just going to look it up really quick. And it comes preloaded in the Webpack configuration. My stream may downgrade while I look up this Medium article to remember what the exact argument is. Yeah, that's it. All you do. This is all you do. Or you can do Sass, or you can do less, or you can do stylus. It's that easy. And then you can start using everything with that syntax. Doubly amazing. I know there's a lot of CSS methodologies behind keeping your syntax nice and clean. For Vue.js, you could still stick with BEM, but to make sure that you're absolutely safe with your class and ID naming methods, which, again, we're going to need with this recursive component naturally, all you do is this. Boom. Now you have unique IDs attached to every class, every style class. It's as simple as that. There's no object manipulation. You can handle dynamic styles within the API, and I may be able to show you an example of that, but if not, just know that it's very easy to do so. It's pretty nice. Okay. We've got app.view set up pretty well. I am going to rename the component, so I'll show you what that process looks like. As you can see, we import hello from .components/hello. So I'm going to rename the component here, and I'm going to call it recursive dropdown. And inside recursive dropdown, I'm going to have to go down here and change the name to recursive dropdown. Back inside here, I'm going to go ahead and change the name. I'm going to copy this, go back to app.view, change the name of this component right here, and change it right here and here. I'm going to go back and check in the browser, make sure that our dev server goes up. It's yelling at me for not having index.js. I know you can't see the browser, but it's yelling at me right now because it can't find the store folder. I made an index.js file in that store folder. And I kind of copied and pasted something from my other app. Don't need this. Don't have any modules. Strict is kind of a cheating way for Vuex to enforce type declaration on mutations. That may sound really, really nerdy. Don't worry about it, pretty much, is what I would say to you. It's always a good idea to have it, and you should just kind of learn around it. If you have any questions on me on that specific facet, please feel free to comment on the YouTube video, and I'll answer it later. Don't have this. And that should be good. I'm waiting to see what happens on my browser. It says it compiled successfully. Let's see if we can reload it. Okay, interesting. I messed up right here. Import all as actions. I'm going to just say import. I'm going to just say import actions. Let's see if that lets us go. Actions is not fine. You know what? We don't even need this. I'm going to bring actions inside index, get rid of the actions file. I had it split up really modularly in a big project that I have, but we don't need to do that here, so I'm going to not do that. Brought in the API, and instead of this, we're just going to call it back. Cool. Yeah, we don't actually have any state yet, so I'm going to comment that out. We will have state, but not yet. Okay, somewhere along the line, so I know you can't see my browser, but it's just showing me the logo, which is very interesting. And that is probably because of this class naming. Right here. So I'm just going to, one here is an interesting facet of Vue.js that we're going to have to learn about. You can technically just do this, and I got really used to it in React. And I kind of like it in the sense that it doesn't look like other HTML, and you can clearly tell that this is not like HTML compliant. However, you cannot change the name. How do I word this? If you have, let me find an example in an older project. Essentially, you have to do a snake case or kebab case within HTML attributes. And so because of that limitation, I also ended up writing my components instead like this. because it would be weird to have it this way, oops, and also have custom components. And the great thing is also with this framework that I don't need to change anything. It automatically converts any kind of JS or title case, or any kind of camel case or title case into kebab case from the template. Vue.js has no problem with that. And I can prove it to you by showing my screen. That's what we got so far. So it's working okay. I'm going to go back, and what I wanted to show you, again, before I forget, is I wanted to show you an example of custom components, or custom HTML attributes in action. Yeah, for example, if you had props, like that's the big one. If you name props with camel case in JavaScript, that's fine. As I just showed you, it converts. But you simply cannot list custom HTML attributes in camel case. You've got to do it in kebab case. So let's say we have a props like is shown. You just can't do this. You've got to convert it to kebab case in the template. One interesting facet of Vue.js. I'm going to turn off Flux right now. My screen is kind of turning red. Sorry about that. I don't know if you guys see that, actually. All right. So we've changed the name of the recursive dropdown component. I think we're good to go in here. Eventually, we may do some state management and manipulation within this component to keep it out of the container, to keep it out of the actual component. But probably not. We're probably just going to have some fun and ignore good practices. Right here, I've got an API header file. I know that I'm only going to be doing GET requests. So, okay, I should change this. Yeah. Basically, what happens here is I've got basically the top level domain of my API. And anytime I do a GET request, I can just say api.get, and then I can, in a parenthesis, pass it a argument, and that argument will be the endpoint. And the only thing that I'm going to do, as we saw from here, is I'm going to just say api.get states this thing, and it's going to get me this whole object from the API. All right. I'm going to see how we're doing here. Okay. Let's get right down to it here. Okay. I'm looking at my prior example, and one thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to go into my store, and I'm going to need to create some state objects. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do this. That means on application load, there is no state. That's the initial state. And I think that's all we need for now. Cool. I also now want to make sure that I'm getting my data. So I'm going to this may have a funny business problem. Oh, I haven't. This won't work because we're not having called that action yet. And it also, the action calls a mutation, so I need to create a mutation as well. So let's see what we got. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with state, Vue.js automatically forces asynchronous state management. State in front-end frameworks essentially is data that changes while you navigate an application. So if you can imagine, when you go to some websites, the look of a website could change based off whether or not you're logged in. So there may or may not be, if that website uses a front-end framework, there is likely a situation where logging in changes some state, which also changes the UI of a website. And the state changes persist as you navigate. If it's in a global store, which we have set up currently, you can also kind of manipulate items on a component level. And even though they're still in the global store, it's just nice that you have an ability to kind of modularize your state management in that way. You can separate the way state is done pretty heavily. Assuming you have other containers, you can create a folder called modules. And in that modules folder, you can put a folder for every container. And in every one of those container module folders, you can put an actions file, a mutations file, a state file, a getters file, and you can really separate and cleanly put together your state. I really enjoyed using Vuex once I got down to it. And a lot of it sounds like wishy-washy babble if you've not used front-end frameworks a lot. And that's okay. I should probably kind of move on. But basically what I'm setting up right now is I want to set up state so that we get data from an API and it persists throughout our application. Once I have that done, we can begin rendering the recursive component. So what I want to do is mutate regions, and there's this states rather. There is a kind of common practice where you kind of capitalize mutations. And there's also a doubly common practice where you create a types folder so that you make sure that every mutation is completely unique. In our case, we're not going to be dealing with a massive project, so I'm just going to move on with this name, knowing that it is 100% unique. I know it's confusing having state and states, but state singular just has to do with our state tree of our application, whereas states are like United States and the entire nested data below it. Oh boy. Probably should have named it differently, but we're going to be good to go here. Okay. Now all that's left is for app.vue to do something that kind of calls these actions. So one thing that I can do I'm looking at my example project. Inside this app folder, I want to do some stuff as soon as the application's created. And you can use the Vue cycle, the Vue life cycle if you want to, but that's a little too advanced for our situation, I think. Instead, we're just going to do computed, I think. The Vue.js API, again, is something that's pretty advanced. It takes a while to kind of read into. Essentially, there's name, there's components. You could have data, you could have computed, and you can have methods. Data is stuff on your component that does not change, or rather, it doesn't change synchronously. Computed is stuff on your component that changes often. It differs from state in just that it's not global. And methods, are methods which you would use similarly in React. JavaScript functions that can do various things, including the dynamic style manipulation that I was talking about earlier. So we decided we were going to do it computed because it's going to change on load, so it's not technically data. But it pretty much will stay the same once we're good there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it states. And we'll do this. Looking at the example right now. So to kind of map our state functions inside of our component, and I'm kind of treating this like a container to manage state and stuff. So we can just do map actions, UX, and basically this gets every single action within our state tree, which is right here. So it's going to get all of these. You could have multiple, and it's going to make them pretty easy to call. And actions are essentially committed. And you know what? I'm actually going to just do... Yeah, that should be fine. Instead of calling it states, we can now do the spread operator and map actions, and that basically means doing the spread operator means like there could be more. It's not just this import. It's a list of things. Interesting that it doesn't show up on my autocomplete. That should be it. Oh, right, because this is the name. It could be anything. So that's the other cool thing is if you've got a lot of state manipulation going on, you've got all these ugly... Eventually, if you have a big project, you could have a types folder, and you could have this like massive, I don't know, fetch states in countries with inclement weather. Like it could you have to name these things uniquely. If you have a big project, and so on a component level, it'd be horrible to deal with that long ass name. So instead, you could just name it whatever you want inside of the component, and that also is nice because you can safely reuse the actions, mutations, or getters in other components. So I'm actually going to call this a method. Sorry to kind of throw a wrench in that, but actions are typically reserved for methods, and I'm just going to call it in the lifecycle, like I said, just to be safe. So you'll be familiar, if you have used React, often you're familiar with the React lifecycle, and if you're not, created basically just means as soon as the application, like as soon as the DOM inside the browser kind of takes any action whatsoever, that's when the component is created, and that's when you want to instantiate whatever within this object. And for us, we're going to call the method. And that's going to make the data available to us immediately. And then what we want to do, now we want to bring in computed. Oh, got a typo up there. Now that we are getting the data on fetch, what we can do is we can say states, and we can return, and we can go straight to our store. And you can reference the state store anywhere by just appending a $sign to it. That's the Vue API in action there. And we're going to reference state, not to be confused with initial state and Redux. And now we can grab states. Boom. So now on every application load, we are going to see states. And I can kind of prove this. Finally, I can show you something that gets rendered. I can just say it's going to be heinous. But I can say states. That's the templating language in action there. Oh, I guess I can't. The browser is giving me some issues. I'll show you debugging in action. Console. Fetch state is not defined. That is awkward. Because it's definitely defined. What happens in network? Nothing. That means the way that I brought in the action is not correct. Apologies for the hitch in the giddy up. I wonder if I could change this because I'm not doing types. Still not defined. I'm not sure on this one. I might ignore state and I might just grab from the API directly, but I don't want to do that. So right now, if you're just tuning in here, the issue is that for some reason fetch data is, it's saying it's not defined on my application. But it should be defined, as you can see on line 28. That wouldn't make sense. Once I get the data, it should be pretty smooth sailing. Famous last words, obviously. I wonder if I have to do, let's try that. Store is not defined. Unknown action type. Now might be a good chance for me to look at the API. I'm checking out the API and they offer this as a solution. We're going to give it a whirl. That. Oh, yeah. Let's give that a whack. Better. I'll show you my browser. Unauthorized. That is expected, actually. My bad. Firebase, I don't think there's anything secret, but I'm going to tune away from my browser. I forgot to set the read settings on my API to be okay for everything. Give me one brief moment. Okay, I'm inside the API console, database, rules. I need to see what my other project's rules look like. Cool. And you can go ahead and see this. Don't want to bore you. There's nothing secret about this. So I'm in Firebase. I've got my API already there, and I just need to change this. Why does that look weird? Oh. Because it is weird. Okay, we're good. Publish those changes. Done. Let's try again now that I'm allowed to read from my API. This mutate states is not defined. Now is another chance for me to go back into the API and make sure I'm doing this right. All right. Mutations, call it like this. So another interesting thing, actions are asynchronous, so you can dispatch lots of actions, or I think it's called, yeah, that's what you dispatch actions, and they go in a queue. Mutations, however, are synchronous. So what's cool is an action can fire off multiple mutations. Vuex just kind of works pretty smoothly once you figure it out pretty well, and it especially plays to strengths once you're inside of a large project. It really fires off pretty nicely. So again, sorry about any kind of hold up here. Once I get mutations done, or once I get the store kind of set up properly and we're getting data, creating the recursive component should go along rather quickly. I'm going to keep that. Let's see if I get yelled at again. Mutate states is not defined. What if I do this? Still not defined. Back to the editor. I'm examining the API, making sure I got this right. You know what? That would make sense. I'm definitely doing this incorrectly. This is just kind of the syntax when you have a large project architecture, because up here you could import mutation types from types and have it map out with unique names. But in this situation, we can just name it. And I gotta fix the nomenclature right here. Let's see if that works out. Still no. This likely has something to do, again, with having syntax related to a larger project. I don't know if you can see my browser, but I'm glancing at the Vue.js documentation. I'm going to go ahead and get out the promise. That shouldn't be the problem, but yeah. That's how we're doing it. That's also how we're doing it. What I need to see is actions calling mutations. Perhaps it's in the mutations documentation. Something about actions. Where are you at? On to actions. So back to our code editor. Still quite don't have it here. The error it's saying still is that mutate states is not defined inside index.js. Specifically at line 13. So right here it's having a problem. So what I really need to see is the naming there inside the documentation. I'm not sure what you guys are viewing. You viewed the code editor. I'll bring you back to the browser. I'm still kind of glancing at the mutations documentation. I'm hoping to find an example where I see mutations committed via an action. And they have an example at the bottom that's not really how that happens. Let's see if modules architecture has this described at all. Yeah, that's how we're doing it. Let me know on Slack if you see anything that's messed up or something that I haven't tried. I think I'm going to go to Vuex examples and see if I can see some in action. It's interesting that it's not registering, but what can you do? Yeah, that's how we're doing it. This doesn't even have any actions to look at, so. If we go to types, we'll see receive all. And we can go to mutations. That's what's happening. I already looked at this one. Let's see. Okay, here's a good example of other mutations. Yes, there are. Cool. Okay. Yeah, that's how we've got it. Commit, promise, commit. Oh, what if I do that? Okay, all I did was add add apostrophes around my action. Of course it works. Of course it works. All right, sweet. We got the data. So I'll show you what I did. Now you see me. Now you don't. I literally added strings around it. That was silly. But as you can see from the browser, we have our data. Now we can get going here. Huzzah. Okay. Code editor. We get the data. Now we can move on from the state. We're not going to do that anymore. We don't need this file anymore. This file, don't need that. So we're getting everything we need. So now what we are going to need to do is we're going to need to pass the data as a prop to our component, and we should make sure that a component can handle that. So first and foremost, I'm going to keep the image so it looks flashy and it lets me know that we're getting everything done. But inside Recursive dropdown, all I'm going to do is make sure that we still get the states data. So let's go ahead and remove that. And I'm going to set it up for a component. We can do self-closing components. We don't need to do this. Let's go ahead and make up a prop. Let's say Recursive dropdown gets passed data. And what's cool again about computed is within your template, you can reference it like so, not as a function call. And within this component, let's go ahead and make sure that we're getting the props. So right under the name, we just say data, and let's call it an object for type validation with our prop. And I put that h1 component in there just because I want to make sure that the component renders, even if the data does not. That'll help me kind of debug if we do have any problems going forward. But I should be able to reference this. Don't even need to. I can just literally say states, or rather data. So I've saved both the files. Sorry, I do have to add a function call. Huh. Doesn't seem to be working on the browser. I know that the component's rendering, but I can show you the browser. It looks like it's, exactly what I'm passing it, which is annoying. It should be passing the actual computed property. Oh, you know what I have to do? This is funny. I have to bind it. As soon as I put this is actually Vue.js has evolved over time to upgrade their API, but this is the same thing as this, which Angular developers will recognize, but I got used to the shorthand case, so we're just going to do that. That binds data that says, hey, this is a custom item, and you need to check for this inside my API, which is within script. So now I should save it, and sure enough, voila. The component's rendering, and the data is coming back to us. We're getting closer, y'all. So now we can get rid of this. Don't need data right now. And I don't care about the style sheets for now. Now is the point where I'm going to go back and reference something that I've already created. So in this, let's go ahead and take this moment to make sure that I did data.dr0 for no other reason except to just make sure the page is a little less ugly with all that data being rendered. What I do want to check right now, though, is that we are getting our Vue Bootstrap components. And as you can see in the browser, we are. And I guess I went too deep with that. There we go. Okay. I got rid of one of the 0 indexes inside the code if you heard me typing. Let's go back to the editor. So we know that Vue Bootstrap is rendering things properly, and so now we can begin rendering our nested component. Essentially what I want to create is this kind of like accordion system where you press buttons, and as you press buttons, it drills down into the API. So if I show you that in data format, the idea is like if I click on, let's go ahead and minimize all these things. If I click on the first state, it'll open that up and it'll show me all the cities. And keep in mind, these are made-up data points, so they might not be actual cities inside New Mexico. And they're definitely not. I don't know what these cities are. So I guess they could be. Ebro could be a city in New Mexico. Anyways, so you click on New Mexico, and that opens up all the cities available. And I've hidden some, but let's say you click on Ebro. Ebro will open up this thing, and so you should see 5 buttons that represent locations. I call them companies. So you should have Craggle, Obones, Equazer, Papercut, and Biflex after you click on New Mexico and then Ebro. So, to get to that point, we're going to start off right away by rendering everything we need. So, let's go ahead and change this up to a v4. This is exactly what you think it might be, which is an iterator. When you do v4, it automatically binds data. And the v4 kind of works like a for loop in Python. So I'm going to say state in states And once you do a v4, you have to do a key that is simply required. The API, the Vue.js API for v4s could let you not, could automatically generate a key for you, but they don't do so, and they just force you to write one so that you can decide exactly how to index things. I've made sure that my data has an ID at every level, so we can simply say state.id. And I'm going to keep passing it props that I know is going to get rendered. Name is going to be state.name. And again, I'm going to go ahead and split this vertically so you can see it. I'll hide these files. So these are kind of the fields that I'm going through right now. Color equals state.color, and that's just, we're going to try and do dynamic styles at the end of the day as a bonus round. And that just about covers it, doesn't it? And so here's the fun part. This is the beginning of the end for showing you the recursive component. I'm going to pass the entire object as a prop. We're not going to render it, so it won't be too big of a deal. But this is essential for continuing the recursion. And again, I've added the bind factor, so it references everything. vbind also, again, like I said, it's referencing the JavaScript object, and they created an iterator for us to reference over. That's why all of these are bound objects. Because if I didn't bind it and it just said key, then as you can tell, it's yelling because it's not unique, it's not a function. Literally every key would just be the string state ID, and that's not going to work for us. Similarly here, you could leave it like this. That's why there's no error, because you could call every component just state.name. But if we bind it, then it's binding it to this state.name. All right. That's a good start. Now we need to prepare for these props inside the component. I'm going to bring this over here so I don't have to reference things. We're really flying now, just like I said we would, which is good. No hiccups so far. Cross your fingers. We can keep data there. So we're going to go ahead and say, we don't need to render key, do we? Yeah, we don't need to pass the key as a prop. That gets generated every time automatically by the iterator. What we do need to pass as a prop is name, and we know that's a string, and color, and we know that's a string, and that should do it. Okay. I'm, again, checking kind of like an example that I have. I want to make sure that we're doing things properly. Okay, so here's where the fun part begins with the recursive project. I know that the buttons are going to be, they're going to kind of fire off event signals that the API is going to grab. And data, I mentioned before, it's supposed to be data that doesn't change. It's okay to use it if it's a small data type and if it changes not too often. You know what? I'm going to try it under computed. I don't think we need to. I have it as data on my other project, but I think we can just leave it inside computed. So the first thing we're going to do is drawer not selected. Oh, you know what? No, we do have to leave it in data. I guess I'm not clear enough on describing how data operates, but treat it for now as if it's its own initial state. So writing right now, drawer is not selected, or I would just call it selected. That is essentially like initial state for this component specifically. And basically what I will end up setting up inside methods is a function that kind of changes that data point, and it will allow the recursed drawers to identify which one is open or not. And this is kind of where we're going to deal with our styles. But for now, I'm just going to say I don't know. We'll call it that for now. We'll come up with a better naming structure later. But the first and foremost thing that I want to get it to do is I want to get it to reference this.drawer is selected. And I'm just going to say equals not, the opposite of whatever it was. And basically what happens here is, that's pretty much the functionality of this button in my text editor. Right now, it is not selected, but if I click it, it is selected, and it decides to, not display the data and just show this little triple dot. And clicky, 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 clicky. So like you notice right now, it's a minus sign. What I could have here is, the function could be called swap plus minus, and depending, that could be like a computed style, like depending on what this is, if the drawer is selected or not, the plus would render or the minus would render. So that's kind of what's planned there. That's a future example of a computed style, and we're going to get to that point. Okay, so here's where the fun begins with the recursion. I have some functions kind of planned out ahead of time. Path item is essentially the top level at this exact moment. So as the data gets drilled down, it tells us at that moment in state what level we're at. And I don't have paths yet because that should be a prop. Oh yeah, I missed a very key point there. I'm sorry about that. So paths equal, and I'm going to pass an array. And basically at this point, this is where we label what the endpoints can be. At the top level, we know it's states, right? And then we know that it drills down to cities, and then we know it drilled down again into locations. And we have to make sure that these strings exactly match our JSON. And I'm going to bring it up. I'm fairly certain they do, but I just want you to see what I'm modeling after. So in data.json, we've got states, cities, and we drill down one more time to locations. Cool, it matches. So those are the paths that we need. So again, if we look at this function, path item is essentially saying, what is our top level right now? And you'll see it used later on. I just wanted to define these before I start rendering the component. And I'll try my best to explain them after the component starts rendering, because I feel like I may be confusing people just kind of blathering on, and I feel like I want to get some data down here. So I'm going to quickly hash out the remaining functions. I can call this, I want to call it children because typically they're going to be an array. Child path, that gets what's next. Yeah. These are all very important functions, and I'm going to explain them as soon as I get the opportunity. Oh, and I made a mess up in syntax right here. Data is an interesting object, probably related to why I was explaining it so poorly. You have to call it as a function, and I believe that has to do with the fact that it creates kind of like its own little state tree. Cool. Yeah, so basically data is kind of like mini component level state initial state. And if you're not familiar with state, then it'll sound really weird to you. But I guess you can think of it as initial prop data that can change, that's not passed, if you're familiar with props. But that's how we're going to use it in this situation. Typically, data is dynamically received but not changed, or changed not too often. I feel like there is a way to not use data, but that's how I have it in my example, and I'm going to keep going there. Okay, so we haven't gotten yet to the recursion. We've been setting up for it, and I want to make sure that I'm kind of passing some data right now. What I'm creating at this point is nested dropdowns. I think technically the term is collapse, but we're going to go forward. I don't want to go through like a refactor of naming right now. Okay, so right off the get-go, let's go ahead and give this a name. Instead of, we were talking about binding things if they're custom HTML attributes. If you're not within an HTML attribute giving custom HTML attributes, and you're just like inside HTML rendering things, you can just use their templating language syntax, which is the double curly braces. And this says, hey, look inside the API for name, and it's going to find it within props. Okay, so we're going to pass some props to this button. I know it seems magic, but they're all detailed inside the Bootstrap Vue API. I can kind of show you the documentation of that. I highly recommend Bootstrap Vue. They have a very tiny Slack channel filled with extremely knowledgeable Vue developers, and it was really fun being in there. I'm actually going to be writing kind of a more written down blog article on this with him. Thank you, Alex, if you end up watching or are watching. But I'm not showing you the browser. My bad about that. So I'm on the Bootstrap Vue website, kind of showing around this is what documentation looks like. You click on components, and it shows you the API for their button component. So I have already kind of code locked down for this, but that's what I'm referencing, and you too can do that via this link if you'd like to. And I'm going to move on. So back to the editor. Again, passing props that I already know are there. So this is an interesting situation right here. VB toggle is a Vue Bootstrap function that automatically binds what I pass it, because it's kind of like its ID property. So that's the only reason I didn't add a colon to bind to that custom attribute, because it already does that in the background. Variant, I'm going to actually just pass it primary for now. Eventually we may ditch variant and color the buttons via the color prop that we passed. This syntax right here, again, is also not magic. This is Bootstrap. This is just straight up Bootstrap. You can find that documentation by going to Bootstrap's website and look at their Flexbox implementation. I typically try not to use CSS frameworks because it does look like magic when I'm trying to explain situations, but I didn't want to deal with styles on a live code situation. And here's another cool one. Instead of doing v events, I believe it is. There is a Vue.js API custom attribute that fires off events. And the shorthand for it is simply the @ symbol. And right here is when we put the function in that we have yet to define, button click function. I'm going to go down and rename it, even though we have no idea what it does. Eventually we'll get back to it. The only thing it does right now is it fires this off. Okay, now might be a good point to stop and see if we're rendering everything correctly. I'm going to save. Let's see how we're doing. Hey, look at that. So, as you can see, you know, we passed data. And so it's gonna, right now it's recursing over only the states. It's only recursing over the top level because I have yet to actually implement the recursion. But once you see the recursion happen, you're gonna go crazy. As you can see, recursion is attempting to occur. The component renders multiple times. It specifically renders for every state. I'm going to get rid of the h1 element because I know now that my component is rendering and it's going to be very confusing to see that component render multiple times. I also do actually want to bring a few styles in. We will probably get to that later, though. Yeah, I'm not going to deal with that right now. It's going to end up looking like ugly. Like if you click the button, it's going to just kind of render other buttons below it. We'll worry about styles later, though. Okay. So we know it's rendering. That's good. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And so I'm looking at an example that you cannot see. Okay, here's one cool thing that we can do. We can do v-if. Wait, no, I am getting ahead of myself. We'll do styles and fun things later where I can slow down and kind of show Vue.js, but the important thing that I want to do is I want to show you the recursion in action. So here is what we got to do. Again, this is going to be a nested collapse specifically. So b collapse, this is a Vue bootstrap custom component. Can you zoom in on your text editor, says Seth. Yes, I can. I'm sorry for anybody else that had trouble seeing. Okay, let me know if that's big enough. Hopefully it is. I don't think I can zoom in again without lopping off some stuff. So b collapse, and now we're going to pass props to it. Actually, we don't need to do this. All we need to do is id equals component id. And we don't need to do this because that would be silly. It's bound, like we just have already said. Okay. Getting ready for the magic. Here's another v-if. I'm going to kind of get into autopilot mode and get some stuff rendered on here because it's taking longer than I thought it would. All right. Here's the magic. Ready for it? You'll recognize children as the computed property that we have down here. Remember, as I said, it drills down. And key we have to pass anytime we do a v4. And we know that every drill down level has an ID in that JSON. Now we can do paths. And you'll recognize paths down here. Oh, sorry about that. You'll recognize paths down here. Or rather, a child path, and that's what I'm going to pass the prop. You'll recognize path from this prop pass that we had, which I'm uncertain why my example. No, I do. I totally forgot to pass paths. Sorry about being confusion here. As we saw right here, I created a prop for paths, so we need to accept it, and we know that it's always going to be an array. And so paths. The recursive dropdown function, or component rather, right here, has all these props, and we're kind of passing it one by one, and we have a computed property to generate what the next path is, and we do that with child path. And so as you can see, it takes the array, and it locks off the top item so that we drill down. And I've tried to do the naming syntax so that you understand how, like, kind of what's happening with the drill down, and also so that this code potentially could be like reusable in your case. It doesn't necessarily have to be a recursive dropdown. I could take out the data and I could make this a recursive component period with computed properties that drill down into APIs. Oh, why is the splash screen up? My bad. I don't know why the splash screen's up. I must have accidentally clicked that. That's very weird. I'm going to go ahead and wait. Unfortunately, there's a long delay, so I'm just kind of glancing at the YouTube thing and making sure that it works. Okay, we're back. I know that you've been back for a while, but on my screen it just showed up. Okay, back to it then. Sorry about that. Must have accidentally clicked something. Thank you for the heads up, Seth. So, I'll give you a minute to kind of glance over the code, what's going down here. Again, we did a v4, and any v4 with Bootstrap requires a key. They could automatically generate for you, and I already touched on this. They don't because you could be the one deciding how to uniquely identify items. I know that my API, every single level has an ID, so I just passed it. Children is a computed property down here, and all it does is it takes the past data, which is one of our next props. It takes data, and then it also uses this path item. So basically it's saying, okay, look at this massive object that you just passed me at the top level. Imagine we're at the top level, okay? We passed that entire JSON of states that contains cities that contain locations, right? So when we get down to the first recursive call, it says, okay, V for child and children. And Vue says, what's children? Comes down here, and it says this.data. And we bounce back up to data, and we know that it's that massive object starting with states. The first thing it does is accesses that object at this index, this.path item, and this.paths 0. So what that's saying is the current level that I'm at is states. So let's go ahead and get all the data within states. So now we're seeing every city within every state at children. So essentially, after all that function, that entire function stack goes down, what we have in children is the cities inside of a state, or rather, child will be the cities inside of a state. And then key, like I said, I've already talked about that multiple times. The key is inside the v4, it's the ID, and I have ID at every API level. And then we have to pass the remaining paths. So this should probably be better named as child paths, but potentially there may not be others, but I'm going to rename it anyways. And so passing it paths, because we know that we need these objects, or these props rather, it says, okay, what's child paths? And all it does is it slices off that array that we started with, so at the first level it ends up just being cities and locations. Okay, I'm going to pass these in order. What we need to do now is we need to do name equals child.name, and we know that every API level has that. And then we do color equals child.color. And data equals and this is where I'm looking at an example. This is a little tricky business. Child. All we passed is child. That would make sense. That's the massive object that gets passed. So at the first level, which starts up here, we pass it states. Once we drill down and find a child, the recursive function call is now going to look at the city level object. So in other words, I can actually show you the browser right now. This is a good point. I haven't saved. This is like an old state in our application. But in other words, our first child will be cities. Okay. Kind of glancing back. The last thing that needs to occur is we need to create an else. We created a v-if up here, and as you can see, is not last path, and we have yet to make that method actually. I'm going to kind of copy paste that one over. What happens with is last path is it just makes sure that the paths array has items still. And so while there's still a capability of drilling down in our massive starting data object, it's going to keep doing this recursive drop-down call. But the moment that we hit the last item, we're going to render something else instead. We don't need to add a conditional to it. And all I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to just pass a paragraph for now. Eventually, the need will come for, we're dealing with all this data. It would be silly to create a recursive component structure for just 2 drill downs. Eventually, the idea is that you would have a custom component for that last item. And we can create that in a moment, but for now I just want to make sure that I'm getting the right stuff. But what's interesting enough is we do need to pass the data to this element, which is kind of silly since it's just a paragraph element, but we can do that and we're going to. v4, and the syntax is the same. Just do this. Let me just make sure we're all good there. If there's any difference. The only difference now is that we don't have to pass paths. This actually won't work. We definitely need to create a custom component to render these different custom props. So now is a good chance to do that. Let's say it's, I don't know. So, sorry that I don't have boilerplate kind of ready there. I'm going to copy paste the API a little bit. guess. We want to call this location display. And we know we're not going to pass that. And actually, we're also not going to pass data. Yeah. All right. Whoa, my mouse went away there for a second. I'm looking at an example again really quick. We don't need to have these functions anymore. Okay, I'm just kind of glancing at an example, making sure that I render things properly. I don't want to waste time trying to debug stuff, you know. One thing we're still going to need is a component ID function. Okay. Again, I just wanted to do a paragraph for now. And let's go ahead and just do name, and we can do color as well. Sure. Don't need this. Don't need that. We may actually re-implement some of those, but for now, let's just leave that. And looking at my example again. The last thing that I want to do is pass, like, this is the bottom level, so I can name it properly. We know that the bottom level is going to be specifically a location. Cool, that should be good. And the other thing we want to do now is we want to make sure that we have access to that custom component, which we've never said. So this is going to be location display. Whoa, not what I meant to do. This one. Boom. And we can just make this a self-closing component. Whoop. All right. So yeah, now we've got to register the component, import, cool, and then now we can pass components underneath props. This is kind of like the registry of components. And you can custom name things, so I could do, I don't know, I could say I could just call it like location, and then I could pass it the value of location display, and that's totally valid. In which case, I would literally just call the component location. Additionally, if you don't want to do that, you can simply register the component, and it will automatically render for you the kebab case usage. And again, like I said, you could do camel case or title case to match the name of your component exactly, but Vue.js does force you to use kebab case for custom HTML attributes, so I got used to just converting it anyways because it would look weird having both, in my opinion. But that's totally an opinion piece. You can just do this. Okay, I'm expecting errors since life is not always as smooth as I want it to be. But I have saved and I'm waiting for my thing to re-render. Okay, so we get everything rendering, except the button events do not do a thing. That's likely a result of my poor copy-paste skills. I'm going to reorder these just for my own sake of mind. Okay, so I'll show you the browser what it looks like. We got the buttons rendering. I bet you there's some kind of errors going back in the console log. 31 exactly. That sounds like probably the number of cities underneath. But that's not good. What does it mean by the... Okay, good. So this is 1, 2, 3. I bet you this is the number of states. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's not. Interesting. Property data got array. We'll figure it out. For now, I'm going to take you back to the editor, and I'm just going to like glance back and forth between what I've got in my example and make sure I kind of got it pretty right. Oh, well, here's one thing. Definitely want that in there. I don't know if I want to do that. Okay. Component ID. Okay, so here's actually where the problem lies, which is totally fair. I tried creating this unique component ID since this is actually kind of like a tricky aspect, and this is worth kind of going over. In a recursive function, you need to make sure that every single ID that you pass to the component is unique. It doesn't care about the fact that we're nesting it because it has no knowledge of that. That's handled all in our own functionality. It's important to note that because, you know, obviously there's going to be multiple ID zeros. We can't just pass it ID as a component ID. So instead what I've got going down is I pass the name prop, and this is where the problem lies. Oh no, that shouldn't actually be a problem. Yeah, because every object level has an ID. So yeah, that shouldn't be an issue. I can actually further make sure that it's unique, just in case. Because now that I'm thinking about it, 15 is a weird number to have a problem with. So I'm going to make it further unique by doing this color because it's a crazy little string. And now I know that for sure every component ID is going to be a unique thing. And going back to my own example, it looks like It looks like I'm using... How many errors do we have? 45 now. This also could be related to the way that I have my data formatted, potentially. I'm just going to kind of go and make sure. I was pretty sure that I organized this properly. It's only ever going to be an array of objects. Yeah, top level is an array. And then you'd be in here, and you'd have cities, and that would be an array of objects, and locations would be an array of, or an object of arrays, rather. Or an array of objects. I had that right the first time. Yeah, there shouldn't be a problem here. Oh, one thing is that there is actually no color for... No, that shouldn't matter. It's bottom level. So that won't matter. Yeah, we don't... Remember, we don't have color in this bottom one. But I just realized we do have some unique items, so let's make sure that we're grabbing those. Put that over here. So I'm looking to see the different items that we get on location. There is actually no name, but we do have address, and we do have company. Cool. I don't think that's going to do anything, but let's check to make sure. So the VLs... Okay, yeah, no, that actually is definitely an issue. We're passing it props for objects that literally just don't exist. So let's try this again. Address, company instead of color. My bad, y'all. All right, let's see what we get now. Oops. Okay, I'm looking at the browser. As you can see, buttons still don't do anything that's problematic. 31 errors. Failed to load resource. The status 404. That's fine. So this is just a favicon. Yeah, I don't have a favicon ready to go. Interesting. It's very, very strange to me. Oh, you know what? No, it makes sense. Yeah, the reason why there was like a abnormal number of errors is because it's just Vue.js is so fast that it's just a small project right now that I'm not used to errors being re-rendered so quickly. So every time I do a cache reset, it resets the error count. So on load. Okay. So still somewhere the problem is related to something with data. $15 is an interesting number. No, it's not. That's literally the number of states. I don't know why I miscounted states before. So 15 is the number of states, so we know that the error is occurring at the top level. That's good to know. Child. Let's see if we can get something to render in the log. I'm just checking to make sure that I reference everything properly from my example. Right now, I just want to see if that I passed all the props exactly correct. And I'm just matching up with my example. Uh-oh. There is a problem, actually. Sweet. That's good. I hope. Let's see what happens now. The other problem is there could be a whole new slew of bugs now. Guess what, guys? No bugs. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Sweet. Okay, but there's no bugs. You know? It doesn't work, but there's no bugs. Alright, that's good that we're getting data passed. Now the next step, at least I know that it's working at the top level. The next step now, I'm going to go ahead and go into created. And so this is the life cycle method. Let's go ahead and just do console.log, not created. That would make no sense. No, yeah, that'll work. Let's go ahead and console.log what data looks like. It's going to be big. It's actually going to be multiple levels of big. Or it's going to be a bug. That's interesting. Oh, well, yeah, no, that... So the bug occurred 15 times, which, you know, that's fair. Data is not defined. Again, just kind of looking at the example, seeing where I may likely have made a problem. So we know the component ID is unique. Make sure I didn't do anything else weird. I'm gonna change this. Those are just visual aids. Okay. I feel like this is something to do with the button, actually, since we're not getting any errors. I wish I could. I can't show you the example code, unfortunately. I mean, for one, it would scare you, and for two, it's production code for a contract that I'm just kind of basing some work off of. But yeah, I think the problem lies within button. The fact that I'm not getting any errors when I click on a button is worrisome. I know that Vue.js is working. That's a good sign. But yeah, if I click on a button and an event is simply not firing, we got problems. Interesting. Let's see. That's the name of the function, right? Yeah. goes. I don't know, what if I sent it to true? That really shouldn't do anything. I did get a lot more errors though. You know what? I'm silly. This is not related to button. Yeah, not related to button at all. Because we're getting errors still related to data. So let's see. Well, we could try and render data. What happens then? We get a crap load of stuff. So we know that cities, and they're unique, and I can show you that in the browser, so at least we know that the data is getting passed correctly. It's hideous, but that's what happens. Okay, back to here. So we know the data is getting passed. As we recurse the dropdown, maybe it's this. Greater than 1. So states get passed, and no, that didn't do it. What if it's greater than 0? That didn't do it. What if it's greater than 2? Also did not do it. Okay. Apologies for this. That shouldn't be the problem, but I'm going to change it anyways because that's an old syntax issue with Vue Bootstrap. Still got crap loads of errors, so that wasn't it. Oh, the error I was getting was just in the created. So that was silly of me. I think I know what we need to do. Okay. Let's check it out. I think what we need to do is, I think we actually don't pass at the bottom level. We just know that we're going to get to it. And the reason that is the situation is, okay. Let's go ahead and also we can add a console log in the button click to make sure that everything's kind of going well. Okay, and I can get rid of this. All right, undefined. So it's not getting this dot children, which is very strange. It gets this dot data. Okay, well, don't see why it wouldn't work right here. This dot children. Okay, well, what is, so we know paths work. Path.0 at the top level should return states. So path item is going to be states, so it's going to say this.data.states. So let's see what happens when we do that. And I know you can't see my browser. So that just returned undefined. And I think that actually makes sense because if I take this off and I go for data and I click on a button, it returns to me the object without states. So that makes me think, actually, and let me just check to make sure, believe now that I see that we should be passing as a path the bottom two, not the top two. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Okay, that's the problem. Whew, sorry about that, guys. So tricky naming with the tricky logic, kind of, actually. There might be a better way of doing it, but inside of our container, when we make the first initial call to the recursive function, we don't want to call the top two because as soon as we path, we're passing the top level right away. What we want to pass is what remains after we pass that function. No function calls. Let's see what happens. Okay. That's so funny. My browser is trying to translate. Never translate on localhost 8080. Thank you. 555 errors. That's way better, guys. That is way better. All right. I'm anticipating the button to work. Sick. It works. This is pretty hideous. I think I can help differentiate things by doing some styles. Let's say yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Recursive drop down, that's the name of the class, right? nested dropdown. Okay, hopefully that will help us differentiate. It does indeed. You can now kind of see the separation of concerns there. Okay, notice that an action is firing off. So we're getting close. There were a crap load of errors on load. I know that you don't see them right now, so it looks all nice and pretty. But let's see what happens. So the latest observer, it looks like it's getting the correct object passed to it. So that's a good sign. I want to see now what the errors are that occur on load. Name is not defined. That likely has to do with our last path. This stuff has the length. For some reason, this is firing off. I'm fairly certain this is firing off. It's not defined in the instance, but referenced during render. Interesting. Okay, I'm back to looking at my example. I think it's just me and you now, Seth. I think I might go into this one and edit it at some point in life, but it's a pretty long video. What are we at right now? It doesn't even show you. Oh, 2 hours. 2.5 hours. Jesus. That's absurd. Okay. I'm just kind of glancing at my example right now because I want to make sure that... So the error gets called at location display, and it says... It's actually a warning. But the fact that things don't render... So yeah, they're all warnings, no actual errors. But usually I consider warnings as errors. Yeah, okay, so literally no errors. And the correct object gets passed, which is good. So location display, for some reason, has access to color. Yeah, so for some reason, it gets called here. So I'm going to look at my example of that bottom call down, v4 child and child. Key is child.id. We don't have name, so it's fine. I bet you this will cut. I'm wondering if this will cut out errors. We're going to find out. We had 776 errors. Let's see how many we get now. Only 110. You didn't see what the edit I made. I'm sorry. Inside location display the call of the component. I renamed the address prop to name on call, but I just passed it child.address instead. Oops, that's awkward. Cool. Damn it, am I still not? I'm not still. Here's what I did in the text editor. I just kind of did this so that I made sure color is getting used. I'm going to go back to the browser and see how many errors we're still getting. Hopefully not 776. Yeah, those are warnings. And so what oh, no, we ended up with 776. So this definitely has to do with the fact that for some reason the props are getting called. Is not last path. That's the name of the function, right? What if I pass this dot child, or children rather? Oh boy. So it's getting the 5 objects. You're looking at the browser? Yeah. So it's getting the 5 objects, as you can see at the const.log. So it's getting the right children. Let's inside the code editor, I'm saying reach else, and inside the browser, I'm going to make sure that we see that. Sweet, that's a good sign. That means it's not related to the last, the drop down. We're reaching the else. I don't know what the warnings are. Okay, I think what we have to do is kind of work with what we've got inside of here. Oh, this is the problem. Silly me. My goodness. That's definitely the problem. Holy cow. What a surprise. No errors. That is so silly. Wow. Mabi. I don't know if you saw the code editor, but the problem was that I was referencing name. I should probably just listen to the exact error that it said it was. It said that name and color are referenced but not instantiated. And sure enough, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to reference things that literally just don't exist in the API. So going back to the browser, we officially have nested recursive components. And they've been rendering slowly because of all those errors and warnings. But if I do a full cache reset, boom, done. That's how fast it is. There's no slowdown, so that's pretty much what we got. I think I'm going to kind of call it. It's been a few hours. But I hope you see the beauty of recursive components. I know there was a lot of problems in there. But the end-all, be-all, and this actually caught me a little bit inside production as well. But when you call paths, don't include the top level because you're already passing it in. I'm going to eventually put the source code up publicly. And we'll kind of fine-tune this to be like kind of like an interesting component, and I'm going to try to make it reusable as well. Eventually, I plan on, as I mentioned earlier, working with Bootstrap Vue contributor, one of the main owners of the project, and we want to write a blog article on using recursive components, and I think we talked about maybe shipping this as a component with API documentation as part of the framework, the Vue Bootstrap framework. Not obviously like in its hideous form, but yeah, here's all the dynamic stuff. And you can have multiple things highlighted if you'd like. Cool. That's all she wrote, y'all. Hope you learned a lot. Have a good one.